Go.
Hello and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Laura Ehrlich, and tonight's guest is Rebecca Makkai. Before I introduce Rebecca, a few housekeeping notes. Writer Mother Monster conversations are streamed live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and then released as an audio podcast on all major platforms. As always, please chat with us during the interview, and we will weave your comments into our conversation. Before I introduce Rebecca, I have also a few exciting updates for you. I've just launched the official Writer Mother Monster shop with everything from t-shirts and tea towels to onesies and undies. You can support the show in style. And this Mother's Day, May 14th, treat yourself with a writing class with me, your host and the author of the story collection Animal Wife. We'll share strategies for prioritizing our craft, explore examples set by other writer moms, and do generative writing exercises. It's only $60, and you can sign up on writermothermonster.com. And finally, a special thanks to our sponsors and patrons listed on the website. Your support helps make this show possible. If you enjoy the episode, please consider becoming a patron or patroness to help keep the podcast going. Again, for details on the store, class, and sponsorship, visit writermothermonster.com. Now I'm excited to introduce Rebecca. Rebecca Makkai's last novel, The Great Believers, was a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. It was the winner of the ALA Carnegie Medal, the Stonewall Book Award, the Clark Prize, and the LA Times Book Prize. And it was one of New York Times' 10 best books of 2018. Her other books are the novels The Borrowers and The 100-Year House, and the collection Music for Wartime, 4 stories from which appeared in the Best American Short Stories. A 2022 Guggenheim Fellow, Rebecca is on the MFA faculties of Sierra Nevada University and Northwestern University, and she is the artistic director of StoryStudio Chicago. Her new novel, I Have Some Questions for You, comes out on Tuesday, February 21st, and you can pre-order your copy anywhere books are sold. She has 2 children, ages 12 and 15, and describes writer motherhood in 3 words as galvanizing, conflicting, temporary. Now, please join me in welcoming Rebecca. Hi.
How are ya?
Good. How are you doing, Rebecca?
Fantastic, kind of. Just in general, a little bit exhausted at the moment, but everything's good.
Yes. Well, you have a book coming out in less than a week, and you just flew in from somewhere to join us like an hour ago. So, thank you.
This one was just for fun. I took my younger daughter has the week off school, so it's like, let's get out of Chicago for 3 nights. I cashed in. I have all these flight credits from 2020 still, so we went to Miami Beach for 3 nights, and we just came back, and it was amazing. It was fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So before the tour begins, and you're in the midst of a pub crawl with StoryStudio, which is both online and in person, with great luminaries, including Roxane Gay. So yeah, it's a crazy time for you. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, no problem. Of course.
Yeah. So let's start with your 3 words that you use to describe writer motherhood. Again, those are galvanizing, conflicting, and temporary. Why did you use those words?
I mean, different reasons for each one. So the galvanizing one, I think, 'cause both of my children are girls. I think there's, I'm sure that parents whose children are not girls feel similarly, but there's something about like knowing that you're setting this example as a working artist, as someone who travels for work, as someone who prioritizes work, that doesn't just feel like, oh, I'm neglecting them. They're going to be in therapy about this. It feels like then they are going to be grateful that they had this model for what, a serious career looks like. So that's the first one. The conflicting, I mean, I think that's just like probably we'll get into the stuff that probably everyone feels about all of this, but it's like all the like, oh, can I, it used to be like, oh God, what if my in-laws read this? Now it's, oh God, about when my children read this, and just the conflicts of time and priorities and what you want to be doing with your day and all that stuff, that whole mess of it. The temporary one, though, I really wanted to talk about because so when I had my first baby, I had published a couple of short stories at that point, but that was it. I like had a novel that I kind of abandoned. I didn't, and then I had this baby, and it felt like this absolutely permanent state that I was going to have a baby forever, and things were never going to get any easier. And I was so hard on myself, like just trying to, like pump enough milk so I could go and write for 2 hours on a Saturday at Starbucks, which was like the only time I was going to have. And until like maybe a week later, I might have 2 hours on the Saturday. And then of course I'd get there and get nothing done because I was so tired. And there was some message board I was on at the time, because this was 15 years ago, and it was slightly pre-social media. And I was just I was asking people, I was like, what, how does this even going to work? My baby's 4 months old and I haven't gotten any writing done. And people going, your baby's 4 months old, chill out. Like it's okay. You can have more time. Which was very good advice. And then someone, I can't remember who this was, someone online recently, I was basically doing the same thing to them. And they were like, no, but my baby is like, 5.5 months old and I haven't worked on my like, it's going to be all right. It's okay to take a year off. It's okay to take a couple of years off, and then if you don't want that to be permanent, it won't be permanent. It's okay. Anyway, I try to keep that in mind just about the whole thing too, where it's like, God, this is hard. But then it's like, well, they're in 6th grade and 9th grade. It's not hard for that much longer. They're not home for that much longer. Things change.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I remember the same thing with, this is not writing specific, but with all the sleep training and milestones, and like you're totally exhausted and you don't get more than an hour and a half of sleep at a stretch. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, is this forever? And it's torture.
Yeah.
But sure enough, things change, and then you're on to the next challenge, but at least it's a different challenge. So yeah. So tell us about the first novel that you completed. So you said when your first daughter was born, you'd published a couple of short stories. So how did you kind of get through that period where you were at Starbucks exhausted and transition to sort of recommitting to?
Well, I was, okay, there's a lot of luck in here. So that novel, it was my debut. It's called The Borrower. And I had written this novel before I had a child, and then I can't remember exactly the sequence, like maybe published a story, and then I was querying agents, but the agents were all getting back with the same feedback, like nothing happens for the whole middle of the novel, like this isn't working. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. So I abandoned that novel and started a new novel, but then I had the baby. And so the complete stroke of luck part was that by this point, so I guess I published 3 short stories before the baby was born. I published 3 short stories. And so the baby was like 5 months old, 4 months old, or something like that. And it was right in this period of me going, oh my God, this is never going to work. And the 3rd of those short stories got picked for the Best American Short Stories, which was like, not only, huge, of course, in my career, that would be huge in anyone's career, but it was also, oh my God, maybe this can work. I need to get a website up, because what if someone wants to find me and I don't have a website? And maybe I should actually finish my novel. Like I should go back to it, and I should, so that's basically kind of what happened. I actually went back to the 2nd novel instead, and then that didn't work. So then I went back to the 1st novel. It was, it was all a mess at the time, and now it seems simple in retrospect. It's also really funny too, because like so I published my first novel. 3 years later, my second novel comes out, and 1 year after that, my story collection comes out. So I have 3 books. I can't even count. 3 books in 4 years, which seems like, the first book took me 10 years. Second book took me about 5 years because it overlapped because I was like abandoning and coming back. And then the story collection probably took me 14 years because like from the time the first story was written to the time the collection came out. So it was like, yeah, so like only 29 years of work for 3 books, like kind of piled on top of each other. But I would get all these like, oh my God, you write so fast and you're publishing so fast and you have babies. And it was like, well, I wrote basically all of this before I had children, not all of the second novel, but like all the first novel basically, and then basically all the story collection ish. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So yeah, it's like the timing now seems like, some kind of superwoman thing, and it absolutely wasn't.
No, I think that's so encouraging though, because people on the outside don't really know how publishing works, and how long it takes and how, you could have a book that you completed 3 years earlier and then it's finally published, many years later, and it seems immediate or easy or lucky or something, but it's, as you said, you'd been kind of working on these projects for years and years, and the timing finally aligned and they were published. So I think that's great for people who are listening who maybe haven't published anything yet to hear and to understand.
Yeah. It's definitely, like I on the one hand, it's like I do appreciate the fact that I did this, the fact that I did publish those, those 3 first books. It's like, and when I had little kids, it's like, I love that that's out there so that maybe someone who has kids can be like, oh, here's someone who publishes and who has kids. But I also don't want it to be misleading, because this was not exactly like I did a lot of writing. I got a lot done, but not that much.
Now, at what point were you able to actually be writing at Starbucks again? Like, how old were your kids when you were able to do that?
Question. I do remember the first day. So I was teaching elementary school full time. I left that part out. So that was a big part of it. And like by like 9 weeks, I don't think I even had 9 weeks. I might have had 6 or 8 weeks maternity. Yeah, so that was a big part of it. I do remember though, this must have been, God, I don't know how, I'm trying to think how on earth the timing worked out. I think that, so basically, the Borrower came out in 2011. And at that point I had like, my kids were like 4 and 1. And that following school year, I went to part-time. So I was only teaching like Tuesdays and Thursdays or something. And so like, maybe it was that year, or maybe it was the following year, but the first day that my youngest went to school, which was baby Montessori, for 3 hours, like she'd started with like half an hour, it was 1 hour. And then they worked up to 3 hours. The first time she went to school for 3 hours, I don't actually love Starbucks, but it's the closest thing to the school. I went to Starbucks and I wrote an entire short story in 3 hours because I was like, and it was a very short story, to be clear. It was like 3 or 4 pages, but it is in my collection. Like it actually like worked. But and then I had time left over. I finished and I was like, oh, it's like 10:45. I got like 45 minutes left. It's just like pure adrenaline and like pent up creative energy, and like, like time felt different, like it might as well have been, 3 days at a residency. Just if there's anyone listening later on audio, I am making manic typing motions in the air with my hands, like I think there's a Kermit gif and a cat one that both do that, like.
Oh yes. Yeah. We can sort of cut that in there. I love it. Yeah. So were you able to write at home as well, or did you have to be outside of the house
Yeah,
to be able to get
helped a
anything?
lot. When they were really little, it helped a lot to be outside of the house because just that idea of like even if they're asleep, someone could wake up at any moment. Um, the interruption factor. It's also like, I don't feel like my writer self if I'm also my mom's self, and am I going to write something dark or sexual? And then my kid, like my baby's in the next room. At that point, I started doing residencies, which were huge for me. And honestly continue to be, but I'm constantly on this soapbox of the time to do residencies is when your kids are little. Like people think it's going to be easier when they're older. It's not, because big kids, big problems. Your 16-year-old has a crisis, you want to be home, versus your 2-year-old has a crisis and it's like, we'll get you another gummy worm. It's okay, right? You like that's the time. It's fine to do them when you don't have kids. It's fine to do them when your kids are older, but like when your kids are between say 1 and 8, that is who those are made for. And you get there and you are like, it is like me in the coffee shop where you just get to work right away and you see all the childless people kind of like taking a couple of days to walk around. The painters are like, oh, I decided to stretch my canvases and just listen to podcasts today. You're like, okay, well, I wrote 2 chapters and it's not because I'm like some genius. It's because I like take this time. So, I mean, God bless, because they're probably like, they need that fellow. They need to walk with the grounds. They need it. No judgment. I'm just saying that parents get a lot done in a very short amount of time when they manage to do those residencies. So.
Oh yeah, no, I've heard that from almost every guest on the show, is that when you have dedicated time, whether it's 10 minutes or 10 days, it's like you will use that time to your greatest advantage. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So now do you still have to leave the house to write now that your kids are older? Or how do you navigate the mom you versus the writer you?
Yeah, no, it's at this point, it's not about that necessarily, although now I have like my 9th grader comes home at odd times during the day. Like I'm never sure when her like weird school schedule. So I'll be like working and she'll just walk through my office at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. So no, it helps to be somewhere else. It helps not to have distractions. I do have ADHD, which was only recently diagnosed, which is kind of hilarious that it was only recently diagnosed because it's very obvious in retrospect. But so ideally strapped into an airplane with no Wi-Fi. That's A+ writing time. But barring that, like, away from home is just, I have less going on with the distractions of home, less likely, if I've bothered to take myself to the library with my coffee to get writing done, I'm just that much less likely to be like, well, first I need to catch up on email. It helps. But, I have this office with a door that closes and that it doesn't feel weird in the same way to be writing at home or to be writing with my kids nearby anymore. And I'm honestly, I don't know. It's not the distraction still, even of like other people. It's the way that I can distract myself. That's really the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I'm so intrigued about the ADHD too. I'm seeing all these memes now, like, oh, it's my ADHD. And it's very familiar. And I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah. So this is a tangent, but
we can go on the tangent. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go on a tangent. So how has having been diagnosed with ADHD helped you sort of manage it, or has it?
No, it has. So first of all, meds, which is just huge. Like I just don't feel as foggy when I'm tired or, just like that helps a lot. And then just kind of like figuring out, actually not feeling guilty, not like assuming I'm being lazy if I'm not getting work done, but just figuring out how my own brain works. Like I work best with deadlines. I work best under pressure. I work best with a ticking clock. it's also really interesting. A lot of creative people have ADHD, a lot of writers, a lot of visual artists, a lot of, ADHD does not mean you can't focus. It means inconsistency in the control of your attention. And the flip side of the distractibility or the fogginess is hyperfocus, when you are into something that you're really into. And when I am actually actively writing, it's not like once I can get going, if I'm into a project, or if I start, if I actually get 10 minutes in, and then I look down at like 4 hours in, and I've not been tempted to do other stuff. But my issue, it's more complicated than that. It's like, okay, but all of the emails that are really urgent that I have to answer before I can really write, because there's just so much, these are urgent emails. They should take 20 minutes to answer, but they're going to take me 3 hours to answer, which is then time that I wasn't able to spend on writing. So it does affect the writing, even when it's not necessarily about the writing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But a lot of women are diagnosed as adults because they just did not know how to diagnose girls.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't physically hyperactive, or if I was, it was stuff you didn't see. It was like I'm like moving my toes in a certain pattern in class. Never going to see it. But I'm verbally hyperactive. Like partly it's that I talk as fast as I do, but it's also like I can't stand pauses in the conversation, and I'm like trying constantly at all times not to interrupt people. But that's just not what got diagnosed. And people of color, kids with ADHD in school, still it's this issue of it being treated as a discipline issue instead of a cognitive issue. So it's like only little white boys have been diagnosed. The little white boys, they're in the spitballs, they get the diagnosis, and nobody else.
The ones who can't sit still. Yep.
That's it. Yeah, squirmy little white boys named Jason. That's what.
Well, no. So I'm sure actually that'll resonate with a lot of people listening. I'm sure many folks, many women, writer mother monsters have ADHD. So we are not alone.
No.
So I'm going to take a hard left and ask if you always wanted to be a writer, and if you always wanted to be a mother.
Oh yeah. Writer, I think around 7th grade decided that was really it. And I'd been writing all along, like writing puppet shows or plays and making my friends be in the story collection with my friends. This is not like some new discovery, but then I was like, oh, I'm going to be a writer. And then for a while there, I said that I didn't want kids. Like, I think high school and into college, I felt like I didn't want kids. I know that by the end of college, I wanted kids, because there was the guy I was dating didn't. And I was like, that might not work out. But it was not some like deep, like I was not a baby doll kid, like, doing the whatever, but I babysat a ton. And obviously, like, I was an elementary school teacher. I'm obviously a kid person by choice. So, and then it took, 3 years to get pregnant with my first. So it was a lot of effort to have these kids. But the writer aspiration predates the childbearing aspiration, I guess.
Did you ever think that they would be in conflict with each other, or was that not something that you really worried about?
Yeah. So, So my father's mother was a pretty well-known Hungarian novelist. And she would have been born in, like, I always forget, I'm bad at dates, but like 1912 or something. And she had my dad in 1935, which is a strange time historically to have a child in Hungary. But she wrote about 40 books, and she was divorced. She was only married for like 2 or 3 years to my grandfather. And then she had this kid who, the thing is, it's so hard to separate, first of all, truth from reality, because my dad fabricated a lot of stuff. But there's always a grain of truth. Secondly, it's hard to separate out like what was choice versus what was like the war. But he was really raised by the nanny. Like she had this like German nanny, to the extent that my father's first language was German rather than Hungarian. Until she realized that this was a huge problem, and then was like, and started reading to him. But my father, and it's funny because my father was a poet. So he was a writer, and he understood in many ways, and he also just worshipped his mother. But he talked a lot about like just being locked out of her study while she was working. And like it seemed very much like writing and parenthood were in conflict, to the extent that when I was like, a teenager, remember hearing these stories and going, yeah, if she wanted to be a writer, she like, it was either or. And if I want to be a writer, I probably shouldn't have kids, because this did not seem to work out very well. And my dad was he had a lot of issues like that that at the time I was like, yeah, it's because his mother ignored him. And in retrospect, it's like, he's been having his childhood in bomb shelters. Like maybe that had something to do with some of this. His father was in Gestapo prison. Could that have had something to do with this? But all I got from him was like, yes, my mother, completely ignored me for her work. So I thought they were in tremendous conflict. And I remember writing some like poem in high school about how it was like to share at like writer club. And it was about how I'd never have children because I needed to be a writer instead. My books will be my children. It was very silly. And then also I remember like in college taking women's literature. It was like British and American women's literature or something like that. It was like a 200 level survey course. And someone asking the professor, who is a poet and had young children at the time, going, well, have there really been any, like, because we're only reading up through like the early 1900s, and going like, none of these women had children. Have there been like, what, is it true? It was something like, is it true that there have been no famous women writers with children or something? And I remember her saying, no, Toni Morrison has kids or has a son or whatever. But that was kind of
like one example.
Okay, like Sylvia Plath. No, that's not a good example. No. So I'm sure there were. I'm sure she was also like put on the spot in that moment of like Toni Morrison. But it's also like we're talking about very different historical times. But what was interesting to me was in that, like, for me, that wasn't like, oh yeah, there are counterexamples. To me, it was like, there aren't. Oh my God, none of these women we've been reading have children. Oh no. And obviously I worked it all out, but that was like, I think I got the opposite message there than the one I was supposed to get.
Well, no, that it's easy to get that message. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you hear it like the narrative is it's either or.
Yeah.
Still, I think the prevailing message. So yeah.
It's just very silly.
It is.
I think about like, because I don't, it's funny. It's like, I don't necessarily know who all has children and who doesn't, because unless I am friends with them, I don't actually know. But like so many, people who are like Lauren Groff, people who are doing huge, and Celeste Ng, people who are doing big, amazing things. It's not just like, getting a short story in here and there, but like a lot of us have kids and are doing fine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I usually ask this question at the end, but I'll ask it now. What message would you give to women who are listening right now who have kids and are writing, and maybe they've published like one short story or two, and
then that's huge, first of all, because if you publish, that's huge, and if you didn't publish, that's fine too. I think that this is where I said I really wanted to emphasize the temporary thing of those three words. Like, I just, as much as I knew it intellectually, the fact that like, oh, you only have a baby for 6 months, it just didn't sink in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's like, no, you're gonna have a baby and everything. It's like, read the books about the baby, the baby, the baby, and no one's like, and then very quickly you're gonna have a toddler, so you better start preparing for that too. It's like, no, the baby. So you start to just really feel like you're gonna have this baby forever and ever and ever. And I just, yeah, I just think, you know, so I think the one thing would, you know, first and foremost would be, you know, yeah, maybe there are fallow periods. It's fine. You forgive yourself and you decide how long a fallow period's going to be. Just like, okay, it's summer, and summer break now means the opposite of summer break because now my kids are home. And I was getting great writing done during the school year, but now it's like, you know, sitting by the pool and getting, you know, in the pool where they like push off from you with their feet and like kick you in the chest, and then they come back up and spout water in your face. Like everyone's favorite. Like that's going to be my summer. And but then the summer is going to be 3 months. And so, you know what, like I'm going to take 3 months and I'm going to think about my next book, but I'm not going to get a lot of writing done. And then in September, I'm going to get a lot of writing done, and it's going to be great. That and residencies.
Do you think fallow periods are necessary?
Yeah,
like,
I do. Yeah,
just necessary for like mental health or for the writing process even?
Yeah, both. Yeah, I don't think there's another art form where people are like, you have to do it every day or you're not really like if it's obviously if it's anything physical, yeah, no, like dancers should take time off. Like, but yeah, painters should take time off, composers should take time off. Writers have invented the weirdest rules for ourselves. Like we've invented the idea of writer's block, which is like such bullshit. No other discipline is out there being like, oh, what if I have this condition? And then we are also the ones like where you have privileged white men being like, you have to write every day or you're not really a real writer. My wife leaves lunch outside my office door on a tray and I just keep writing and I miss Christmas and my family forgives me because I just keep writing.
And then she types up the pages for him too, and like
and proofreads, fixes his grammar, makes it better while he's asleep. He doesn't even know. Just goes in there and like but it's the stupidest advice, partly because like nobody can do that except for that one guy. And then also like you need time off. You need to like readjust. You need to come back fresh. You need to like do other things. And obviously like that's not an excuse to be like for it to turn into a 50-year hiatus when you never intended it to. It's just like, yeah, like, okay, like right now, like I have a book coming out in a week. I'm not writing. Like I made a note on the plane today of like a story idea, but like, you know, 2 sentences, but because I'm doing publicity and I'm like the writing I'm doing is like, you know, a craft essay that they, you know, it's going to go with the book, or I have like a written interview, or this bookstore wants 5 book recommendations for their blog and I have to write a thing up about each of them. So like that's my writing, and then an endless email. But like, why would I expect myself to be writing something creative right now? My head is totally in this new book, and anything I wrote would be like influenced. It would have all the pressures bearing down on it of everything going on in my life with like my concern about this new book. It would be like reactionary writing or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like me being like, I bet that someone's going to hate this about this book. So even though that hasn't happened yet, I'm going to make this new thing totally the opposite because so not a good idea.
So let's talk about the new book, and then in a few minutes, maybe you'll read us a little excerpt. But tell us first, so what was different about the process of writing this book now that your kids are older versus writing the previous book when your kids were,
I'm not sure in terms of the writing. I'll say the publication feels really different because they're old enough now to really get it. I think it was my story collection when they sent me finished copies, and my younger daughter would have been like 4.5 then. And just we opened up, it's like 30 copies of the story collection. She's like, good job, Mommy. You wrote all those books. Yeah. Yes. I've been so busy. So they get it now, which is really fun. Yeah, I don't know. I think certainly, I will say one thing that was really different was the summers got easier. Where, like I said, it was that like, oh God, and I would forget every year. I'd forget and be like, I'll get this done in the summer, and then June would roll around and I was like, oh right, this is like 24/7 child duty. With this book, they were just much more self-sufficient in the summers, and then this past summer they both went away to camp for part of the summer, and I was in like high editing gear rather than creative gear, but it was time that I really needed. And so, yeah, that was different. Just a little bit more time. At the same time though, it's like, it's so hard to talk because it was also COVID the whole time. Well, not the whole time, a lot of the time. And it was right in the aftermath of The Great Believers, which was just, a significantly bigger book for me than my first 3 had been. So like, it was like, I started writing this book in early 2019. So like a little less than a year after The Great Believers came out. So it was like still like touring and Great Believer stuff constantly, which was amazing. And then hard wall at COVID, and then home. And then I didn't get anything done that spring because we were homeschooling like everybody else. And then the summer was, like, it's not easy to compare and be like, well, it's because my kids are older. It's like, there's a lot of other stuff going on too. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, again, another little detour, but tell us about being nominated for a Pulitzer Prize and National Book Award. Like, what was that like?
Very different from each other, for one thing. Because the National Book Award, they announced the long list, and it's this big deal, and then they announce the short list, and that's an even bigger deal, and then your sales go up and it's amazing, and then you like fly to New York and it's this like these parties and this red carpet thing, and then you find out you don't know, like you find out in real time. Pulitzer, I found out on Twitter after the winner was announced.
Really?
Yeah. Pulitzer is like, you don't know who was a finalist. They just, and it's like the Pulitzer announcements is like someone in front of is like in a meeting room at Columbia University, like announcing stuff, and there's like a screen behind them, and it like shows the whatever. And so I knew like the winner had been announced, and I was like, that's great. I heard that book, a smart bookseller had predicted that book would win. And I was like, he was right. And then like an hour later, someone tagged me on Twitter and was like, congratulations to the winner, and also to the 2 finalists, Rebecca Makkai and Tommy Orange. And there's a picture of like the stack of our 3 books together. And I was like, what? And then she was like saying that she was a judge. And I was like, but what if she's just nuts? Like, someone texting my agent. I was like, what's happening? But there's zero news coverage for that in terms of the finalists. Really, really big deal if you win. Really big deal for your bio, right, down the road, but no interview requests, no local news, no national news, no nothing. Social media, which is great, but wildly different experiences.
That is so strange and interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like, equally grateful for both. Just like, really, really, really different. But in both cases, it's this wonderful thing. I've been a judge for a lot of awards, including the National Book Award since then. And, it's like, it's deeply felt and also hugely subjective. Like they really, it's 3, 5, whatever people's favorite books of the year. That's what it is. And it's wild that certain ones take on a weight that other ones don't. When the judging panel for the National Book Award one year could be interchangeable with the judging panel for like the Penn Faulkner Award the next year, could be interchangeable for the judging panel for the Pulitzer the next year, because they're pulling like writers and maybe a critic and whatever. So it's just a matter of what prize they happened to be judging for that year. Does that make sense? Like there's nothing, yeah, there's nothing like, but then certain ones have just way more cachet or way more name recognition, or yeah, I mean, it's all, I think it's really, it's psychologically healthy to understand how subjective and kind of random it all is while at the same time it is, these judges pouring their heart and soul into like reading every book they possibly can and going to bat and loving these certain books. It's like they mean it. Nothing is rigged. Oh my God, those things are so on the level, like, but it's also just incredibly personal and subjective.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Have your daughters read your books?
My 15-year-old has started like 2 of them, and then 3 of them, I think. She started 3 of them and then just like not gotten very far.
Oh. Did she give you any feedback, or she just kind
of? She's like, it's really good. I just got it. Yeah, she's just got a lot of stuff going on with school, hard time with the follow through. She hardly finishes any books. Like she'll finish books for school. Like she's a huge reader, always been a huge reader, never finishes books. I mean, once in a while she will, but like these, it'd be like, you got like halfway into this incredible classic novel and you just stop. She's like, yeah, I forgot that I was reading it. Okay.
She got the sense. It was like, yeah. Okay. So speaking of your books, so I'm going to hold this up. Let's see if we can. So anyone listening later, I'm holding up, I have some questions for you, which has a really cool cover. Comes out on Tuesday. And Rebecca is going to treat us to a little bit of the book.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read this part that is like not completely indicative of the book on the whole, because like there are only a few sections written in this kind of strange way. But it's so just basic background. It is a literary feminist boarding school murder mystery. And basically this woman is returned to her boarding school to teach a class for just a few weeks. And while she's there, it starts to really sink in for her that the wrong guy is probably in prison for the murder of one of her classmates in 1995. And she's staying in this guest house with this other guy who's teaching. His name is Oliver. And there's some kind of story on the news that her husband has texted her that she shouldn't like to stay away from because he knows it'll upset her. And the other thing you need to know is that constantly while she's there, because she's this is New Hampshire, and she's left her kids with her husband in LA, and people are constantly asking her who is watching her kids while she's there.
That's good. Okay. All right, I'm going to give you the full screen, Rebecca, and take it away.
Okay. Amazing. Oh, now you can see all the junk in my office. This isn't good. Wait, hold on. I'm going to, okay. All right. After Fran left, I asked Oliver, do you check the news? Was there anything big today? I was itching to check Twitter now, but if Oliver could just tell me what had happened, it would be better. It was important that I got sleep. Instead, though, he scooped up the remote and turned on the big TV in the seating area. And there it was, the reason Jerome had warned me off the internet. Anderson Cooper with new developments on a story I'd found particularly disturbing. It doesn't matter which story. Let's say it was the one where the young actresses said yes to a pool party and didn't know. Or no, let's say it was the one where the rugby team covered up the girl's death and the school covered for the rugby team. Actually, it was the one where the therapist spent years grooming her. It was the one where the senator, then a promising teenager, shoved his dick in the girl's face. She was also a promising teenager. It was the one where the billionaire pushed the woman into the phone booth, but no one believed her. The one where the high school senior was acquitted of rape because the sophomore girl had shaved her pubic region, which somehow equaled consent. Oliver asked if I was hungry, and I shrugged. It was the one where the woman who stabbed her rapist with scissors was the one who ended up in jail. It was the one where the star had a secret button to lock the doors. Oliver called Foxy's and ordered us a white pizza with sage and a mushroom and onion pizza and extra packets of red pepper flakes. I decided I was allowed to eat one slice of each. It was the one where the harasser ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the rapist ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the woman, shaking, testified all day on live TV and nothing happened. Anderson had moved on to other topics, but Oliver asked if I minded his switching over to MSNBC. I didn't. I said, I can't believe there's finally cable on campus. We used to get 3 channels. Just to watch Beverly Hills 90210, we had to have Danny McCallick's mom tape it every Wednesday in Darien and mail it to us on VHS. The story was on MSNBC too. The one where the judge said the swimmer was so promising. The one where the rapist reminded the judge of himself as a young rapist. It was the one where her body was never found. It was the one where her body was found in the snow. It was the one where he left her body for dead under the tarp. It was the one where she walked around in her skin and her bones for the rest of her life, but her body was never recovered. You know the one. The pizza was at the door. Oliver found us plates. He said, so who's watching your kids while you're here? That's where I'll stop.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's enticing.
Like alarming.
No, yeah, I love that.
Well, thank you.
So tell us, I mean, this is again a bit of a digression, but I'm interested. Tell us about and everyone hates this question, but tell us about the where the story originated.
Yeah. I mean, lots of different places because it's a novel, but I have lived on campus for the past 20 years. I have lived on the campus of the boarding school where my husband teaches. I do not work here. I don't have any responsibilities here because people always assume then when I say that they think it's like the facts of life and like I like have kids knocking on the door. Like I don't. But this is I'll show you since we're on camera right now. This is my office, and that is the door to a dorm of 40 teenage girls.
Oh my God.
They sometimes make noise, but that's kind of it. So I was always gonna write a boarding school novel. Just thought it would be like on my deathbed, but I ended up doing it much sooner. And then to complicate things, this is where it's like I can only dole out like a certain amount of information at a time, or people get overwhelmed. This is the school I went to for high school. I was a day student at this boarding school. My husband did not teach here yet, to be clear. So I was like a financial aid day student, and then I met my husband in Vermont. We lived in Baltimore for a minute, and then I dragged him back to Chicago because I had a job here, and he was a high school English teacher, and the place he got the best job offer was at my old high school. So we were only going to be here for 3 years. It's been 20. And now this is my daughter's a freshman here, which is why she's like, I said, like, she's like in and out all day. It's because we live on campus. So she just comes home sometimes. Anyway, just that idea of like, revisiting an old place, which I think I don't know. It's not as like vivid for me, because I think the vivid thing is like when I go back to my college and I haven't been there for years and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I thought that was over there. That's actually the sense I was getting at in here, because I just never had that much, not that much time away from my high school. So it's kind of not the vibe I'm going for, but I was still just, fundamentally interested in the way a place can change meaning for us over time. And then there's all this other stuff. There's like a lot of Me Too stuff in here. There's this murder, this wrongful incarceration aspect. There's this sort of like true crime obsession aspect with like, this is like, her roommate's death is something that has really caught the public's imagination over the years. And so there's like all these YouTubers and podcasters attached to it. So there's that aspect. Those are just other things that were on my mind a lot, in the past few years. And then many other points of origin too, but those were the big ones.
Those are really fascinating points of origin. Yeah. Oh my gosh, where to go from here? I have so many questions and we only have like 10 minutes left. So let's talk about girls, raising girls.
Yeah.
And living amidst girls.
Yeah.
And what do you feel, how do I want to phrase this? You talked at the very beginning about the feeling of responsibility of raising girls in this world. And can you talk a little bit about that, about raising girls and then living among them? And I mean, even if you don't work with them directly, they probably see you as an authority figure. So talk a little bit.
No, they would not know. They do not know who I am.
Really?
This is where, like, I can't emphasize enough how much I don't work at this school. So we have our own entrance, and I walk through the dorm I walk through the dorm sometimes because like that's where Ubers will pull out, is out front. So like I'll go through there, but it's usually at like 6 a.m, so they never see me. They used to be babysitters for us, which was cool, but they definitely didn't see me as an authority figure because they would not have recognized, like they didn't know who I was. Like a couple of them babysat for us, but so yeah, no, I don't live among girls in that sense. I don't live with them. I don't talk to them. I don't like.
It's very separate. Okay.
Really, yeah. But no, but with my own kids, that is definitely something that's on my mind. I don't know. I think I always wanted kids to be ambitious. And I got kids who are ambitious in very different ways than each other. The older one is the one where it's like she wants to be an actress and she's like these big dreams, and she's, I fully believe she will have a successful career in the arts. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but she's really driven. And then my younger one is a perfectionist, which is not the same as ambitious. It's a different, sometimes it can lead to the opposite of ambition because you don't want to do anything until it's perfect. But also she's a really talented musician and wants to be an interior decorator. Like neither of them has really ever expressed interest in a job that's not the creative field, except for when they both wanted to be veterinarians, which I think every kid has to have. Like
My daughter wants to be a veterinarian too.
I wanted to be a veterinarian to could not, barely squeak through biology later, when I actually got to study it. I think, so first of all, I love that they're both really ambitious. I also love that the world is just that much better for their ambitions than it was when I was their age. Mm-hmm. My mom was a university professor. I didn't feel like, very into supporting whatever I wanted to do. I never felt like any kind of anything holding me back from any career that I would want to have. But just, I don't know, just there are things that there's, obviously there are things that are worse, but I think in so many ways it's just substitutions. Like I grew up seeing anorexic fashion models constantly in the magazines that we all subscribed to and that would come to my house and that were a really, really big part of my life. And, there were just like the body issue, the body shaming, the slut shaming, that like just all that stuff that was out there. And then and people are like, oh, it's so hard for kids today because of Instagram. It's like, yeah, but I don't know that is any different, particularly in size. I don't know that that's a bigger influence for only my teenagers, has a phone and is allowed on there. But like, I don't know that that's somehow plays a bigger role in her life than Sassy Magazine played in mine. And Sassy Magazine would never have put anorexic models in, to be clear, but the other ones did. But then it's like mostly healthier stuff that she's seeing there. I understand, like, I'm not going to be Pollyanna-ish about it. And I know that there are obviously issues, one of which is just plain old phone addiction, and everything else. But like, I think that they're getting significantly healthier messaging in many ways than I got in the 90s. Yeah.
The 90s were pretty fucked up.
Yeah, they were. They really were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the like, yeah, I mean, the things, and this is a big theme of this novel for me, actually, too. Someone looking back on high school in the 90s and, realizing like, I can't believe we put up with that stuff. Also, I can't believe we participated in that stuff is another big part. It's not like, this person is not like, a victim here entirely, but it's definitely it's something that's been on my mind. Just this, looking back and going, God, we really thought we had it all figured out. Just like these kids think they have it all figured out, and let me tell you, they don't, right? But like, we really were like, we are, we thought that we were so progressive. We thought that we, not that, and I don't want to misspeak. I don't mean that anyone in their right mind thought that sexism and racism were over, but there was a sense of there was a sort of a within the media, if nothing else, right? There was sort of a self-congratulatory sense of like, let's pat ourselves on the back for how far we've come, and it was very much the narrative in the media was very much about how far we had come rather than the work that we still had to do. Even if on an individual basis, you knew that, you knew sexism or you knew racism or you knew homophobia, just the overall vibe was like, well done. And God, we were so far off the, and you're like, and you look back, 30 years later, you go, oh my God, what were we doing?
Oh yeah. No, it's so true. Yeah. Oh wow. Nostalgia is so prevalent, I feel like, especially amongst women. I think you and I are around the same age, in our 40s, looking back at that era, and it's kind of like, it's challenging to feel nostalgic for a time that was really problematic.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's all. Listen, when I was researching The Great Believers, it's about the AIDS epidemic in Chicago in the 80s. And I was, I did mountains of research. It was all mostly interviews with people who'd lived through this. And they had an immense nostalgia for that time. And they would, they'd say things like, it was the best, worst time, or like, it was a living nightmare and I would go back in a heartbeat. Like, just they would also talk about this camaraderie and this, just being young. People can miss being young, regardless of what was going on around them, and a sense of purpose, and the humor that often was part of their activism. Like there's a lot to miss, and I that was fascinating to me. It's I've gotten a lot of people, this is very different, gotten a lot of people to admit how nostalgic they are for like the first 2 weeks of COVID lockdown. Like, which I know is bizarre. And I know no one who admits this to me, and I'm someone who I'll admit to this too, no one means that they want it again. No one means that they're happy that it happened. No one means anyone should have died. Just like it mixed in with everything else. There was something, and obviously different if you were actively losing someone. And so that's obviously not what I mean, but like just the hunkering down and, oh my God, we're all going to make bread. And does anyone know where you can get toilet paper? There's something about that there's just this piece of it that you can miss, that there's like, yeah, like I don't want to go back, but there was something like exciting, and as terrible as it was, and I hope that anyone listening, and I hope that I hope you understand what I mean. I do not mean that I actually think it was great, but it's okay.
I think it makes sense. Yeah,
it's okay to miss the good parts of a bad time. It's okay.
That's very eloquently said. And yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, there was a sense of like coming together in community and supporting each other, and a shared experience that is hopefully, knock on everything wood, a once in a lifetime experience that you're all living through together at the same time. So that's, there's something very communal about that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, this is a good note to end on, sort of the finding the silver lining in the bad times, but also, if you haven't read, well, no one has read it yet because it comes out on Tuesday. I have some questions for you. Here it is. And pre-sales are so important, and every book sold helps, right? So
Yes,
go
usually.
out and order it. It's
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank you so
And Rebecca, thank you. This has just been a joy.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Come back when the next book comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll talk again about Pulitzer Prizes. So
Not that.
knock on wood, best of luck with this one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you all for joining us this evening. If you enjoy the episode as much as I did, please consider becoming a patron or patroness of Writer Mother Monster to help keep the podcast going. You can find details about that, about donations, about the store, and the class for prioritizing our craft on writermothermonster.com. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Have a wonderful night and happy Valentine's Day.